In Golden, Colorado is the glorious Colorado Railroad Museum. Although their main building looks like a depot from the 1880s, it's actually a replica, along with the other buildings on the property. The first thing that drew my attention was the Denver and Intermountain Railway standard gauge caboose's size compared to the narrow gauge Rio Grande Southern caboose. Another thing to point out is that Manitou and Pikes Peak Railway number 1 is facing a different way than the other sidings around it. Number 1 is a 4-cylinder 042 cog locomotive built in 1890. I do not know if it's narrow gauge, standard gauge, or has its own gauge. Inside the depot are some old signs and some models that look to be homemade O-gauge ones. Note the electric box cab to the left. Also inside is a replica of a Western Union telegraph and cable office, complete with a mannequin of a telegraph operator. On the siding closest to the depot is Colorado Northwestern number 30, a narrow gauge 280. Its rods are rather rusty and it resides on a dual gauge siding. The inner rail is 3-foot narrow gauge. 3-foot narrow gauge is common in Colorado, while the outer rail is 4-foot 8.5-inch standard gauge. Number 30 was built by Brooks Locomotive Works in 1898 and arrived at the museum in 2012 from the city of Boulder. It is the only surviving engine from the Colorado and Northwestern Railroad, which later became part of the Denver, Boulder, and Western Railroad. It has a weird style of cab where the firebox door is not on the cab floor. A few smaller narrow gauge and standard gauge engines have this feature, though it's too small to have any seats for the crew. Eventually, the engine became Rio Grande Southern number 74 as mentioned on this plate. And you can even ring the bell on this locomotive. In front of engine number 30 is Union Pacific passenger car 5442 and a matching diner. Right behind engine 30 is Rio Grande number 04255, a maintenance of way kitchen car. Inside the car, it's kinda set up kinda like the telegraph office inside the depot. On the other side is a large stove and plenty of counter space. I don't know why it has this cupola. Is it for ventilation or is it for tall people? The car right behind it is Rio Grande Southern 01789, a bunk car that matches well. 01789 has a special knuckle coupler so it can work with the older style link and pin couplers as well. Inside is also another setup with a mannequin. The next car is Rio Grande Southern Reefer number 2101. But on the other side it was lettered as Colorado and Southern 1113. I don't know which side is correct and which one is not. But at least the measurement details are correct. Next is a Colorado Classic, Rio Grande Southern Caboose number 0404. Built by the Rio Grande Southern in 1902. It has this lettering on the door. I don't know if it was for the car in front of it or when passengers rode on this caboose. The seats in the coupe are similar to those used in the passenger cars in the era. This framed piece of paper tells a lot of information about this caboose. The stove is still there, but looks rather worn and hasn't been restored. But the benches look reupholstered since it arrived at the museum in the 50s. The size difference between the standard gauge caboose and the narrow gauge caboose can also be seen by the coupler height, which still works, but across the boarding platforms is CB&Q 5629, a very massive 484 locomotive. It was built by their West Burlington shops in 1940 and arrived at the museum in 1963. The train operating today wasn't pulled by a steam engine, but it's Galloping Goose number 7, built in 1936 using a Pierce Arrow car body. It was given this passenger car body in 1945. Originally it carried a boxcar body. Along the platforms are these information boards with pictures of equipment that are at the museum and are not at the museum. I hope one of those two exact BNSF locomotives makes it here one day. Here we see Galloping Goose number 2, a 1931 Buick, and Denver, Leadville, and Gunnison number 191. Number 191 was built in 1880 by Baldwin and is the oldest surviving steam locomotive in Colorado. On the next narrow gauge siding is Rio Grande 3407, which is still lettered for the Georgetown Loop Railroad. On the back side of the library building are 3 speeders and a small derrick crane that is usually pulled by a speeder. The Union Pacific diner car that was shown earlier is number 4801. Also outside is a G-scale layout. The lower line that Percy is on is electric, while number 191 is live steam. Up on one of the high sidings is Colorado Central number 40. Narrow gauge 280 that was built by Baldwin in 1920, but it never ran on the Colorado Central. It was actually built for the International Railroad of Central America located in El Salvador. It arrived in Colorado in about the 1970s for the Georgetown Loop Railroad. It arrived at the museum in 2006 with the tender lettered for the Royal Gorge route. Rio Grande number 318 was built by Baldwin in 1896, originally for the Florence and Cripple Creek Railroad. It has the same style of cab as number 30, but a different style of firebox door. But I could not go inside the cab as the doors were locked shut. There's some coal in the tender, but not a whole lot. It hasn't operated in a long time. Next to a pile of old ties is stock car number 7064. Here is the back side of West Side Lumber Company number 14. It is a 3-truck shade that was built by Lima in 1916. It came from the Georgetown Loop and is now lettered for the Argentine Central Railroad. Many railroads in the 40s and 50s had fast merchandise service trains. The Union Pacific's was the Challenger. This one is double-door boxcar number 9149. Many of these merchandise cars ran on the Challenger passenger train or as their own freight trains. Here's Rio Grande 5771, an F9A, which was built in 1955 for pulling the California Zephyr. 5771 and 5762 were the last passenger units used by the Rio Grande. The railroad used these engines as late as 1984, but didn't arrive at the museum until 1996. The Rio Grande also ran this pair with another B unit, number 5763, which has survived at the Cheyenne, Wyoming roundhouse. I have no idea what happened to the larger one, but it's most likely an old Alco used for head-end power. On the right side of the door you can barely see the slogan "Everywhere West," which parent Burlington route used. This Railway Express Agency reefer was specially modified to work on passenger trains for express refrigeration shipments. Right behind the F9s was Rio Grande Combine number 1230, which was used on the Winter Park Ski Train, California. The car behind that was the Santa Fe Super Chief observation car, the Navajo. It was built in 1937 and retired in 1958 to be preserved. It was purchased by the Intermountain NRHS and it was moved here in 1972. In its heyday, it boasts 3 standard sleeping compartments, 1 double bedroom, and seating for 14. Now it stores pamphlets, maps, papers, and books. This boxcar is for the San Luis Central, which is located in Monte Vista, Colorado. The CB&Q painted their new boxcars like these green in the 1960s. This Union Pacific bunk car was originally built as a Pacific Fruit Express reefer car in 1963 and then rebuilt in the 1980s. Some old wood-sided boxcars and a frameless tank car sit on a siding nearby. This is Colorado and Southern Standard Gauge Snowplow number 99201, built in 1899. The rotary snowplow is coal steam fired, but instead of driving wheels like a steam locomotive, the cylinders drive the giant blade. Many snowplows similar to this were converted to diesel, but fortunately this one still has its original boiler. Next to the snowplow was this information board, like the one near the platforms. Union Pacific 4455 is an 060 shunter built in 1923 by Lima. Although it was retired from active service in the 1950s, it was stored at the Cheyenne, Wyoming Roundhouse until 1970. As you can see underneath the cab, the Union Pacific classified this as an S51 class. I originally confused this engine to be a USRA design, but it's not. Surprisingly, this welcome plate was near the F9 and not at the front of the museum. Here's a map of the museum grounds. There are a lot of sidings with boxcars out of the way. This here is a Denver and Salt Lake caboose. The Denver and Salt Lake ended up becoming part of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. Now we are inside the roundhouse, where we see a white passing Yukon Route passenger car stayed inside. Also inside the sheds are 346 and 491, which we will see a bit later. Also is this old roundhouse board of the current projects that are being worked on, as well as the operational locomotives. Number 493 belongs to the Durango and Silverton, and it was usually on display at Silverton. Also inside the roundhouse are some information papers about the locomotives in the roundhouse. Rio Grande Southern number 20 is currently at Strasburg, Pennsylvania, which is a place where many steam locomotives that are being worked on, including Union Pacific 4014. I have no idea what engine had these builder plates. Outside the roundhouse is an old boxcar whose body is used as a storage building. Also outside the roundhouse is this information board. There is also some equipment on display around the turntable. The sidings around the turntable have narrow gauge and standard gauge rails on them. On the side of the roundhouse is an information board of engine 346. I don't know much about this boxcar, but it looks like it was built off an old speeder trailer. Here's an information board about the turntable. Was originally used at the Chicago, Burlington, Quincy Roundhouse in St. Francis, Kansas. The turntable is moved by hand and has tracks for both narrow gauge and standard gauge equipment. Car number 9 was originally used on the Georgetown Loop Railroad and was probably brought here in about 2008. Here's an outside view of the roundhouse, which was completed in 2000. Inside the roundhouse are engines Rio Grande 346 and 491. This was one of my favorite pictures that I took, so I made it black and white here. Number 491 is a K37 narrow gauge 282 built by Baldwin in 1908, while number 346 is a narrow gauge C19 280, built in 1881 by Baldwin as number 406. The small black and yellow diesel is commonly used for shunting around the museum grounds. Golden City and San Juan Railroad was acquired by the museum in 1965 and was originally painted green. It was built by Plymouth and weighs between 8 and 25 tons. I'm thinking this might be the tender of number 20. This is Rio Grande number 3011, a GP30 built in 1962 and arrived at the museum in 2004. Two other narrow gauge diesels are Golden City and San Juan number 4 and Rio Grande number 50. Some old trucks are sitting in front of a maintenance of way car. This is Rio Grande coach number 280, built sometime in the 1880s and was arrived here in 2001. Here are two more open cars that used to be on the Georgetown Loop Railroad. This car is Western Weighing and Inspection Bureau number 810, a scale test car. It was hauled around to many different rail yards for testing their scales. This is Rio Grande number 683, a standard gauge 280. It was built by Baldwin in 1890 as number 583 and is the only surviving standard gauge Rio Grande steamer. Behind 683 is Midland Terminal number 29. It was probably built in the early 1900s and has a very large observation deck. I think this is the inside of the Colorado Terminal number 29 or the next car that I'm going to show you. This is the Rio Grande Southern Business Lounge car named Rico, built in 1880 as a Denver Rio Grande Western mail car and then rebuilt into its current state in 1892. At the entrance to the museum is a wig-wag crossing signal which swings back and forth, which is used with a union switch and signal teardrop bell. This is Rio Grande Southern Caboose number 0400, which has no logos and was formerly used on the Georgetown Loop Railroad. Colorado and Southern 10009 was built in 1880 as Denver South Park and Pacific number 76. Here's a head-on view of the turntable where you can see the giant levers that are used to turn the turntable. Here we see a Rio Grande flanger type snowplow and a Rio Grande mail car. I have no idea what railroad this car number 4 came from. I do know that this car was built in 1901 and can be reserved for private parties. This is American Oil number 1, an 040 saddle tank engine that was built in 1920 by Alco. What is unusual that its number plate is blue instead of red like on most locomotives. Engine 1's coupler is also at a lower height than the caboose in front of it. And that caboose is Colorado and Southern 10606, a woodside caboose built in 1904 to a 1919 design. The interior is tan with a brown floor instead of green. The interior is also mostly made of wood instead of metal. And the operation instructions are painted onto the wall and not on a separate sign. I'm going to divide this video into 2 parts here because I don't want to edit anything more than 22 minutes long. Part 2 will feature a ride on the Galloping Goose, the rest of the yard, and the inside of the depot. So thank you guys for watching, and make sure to subscribe so you know when part 2 comes out.